Hello, and welcome to the Let's Talk About Why podcast. I'm your host, Tara Zimmer, and I'm so glad you decided to tune in today. Here at the Let's Talk About Why podcast, we answer that age-old question, why? Behind every great business, book, leader, and idea, there's a why, and we're here to talk about it. Hello, everyone. I am so glad that you've tuned in for today's episode of the Let's Talk About Why podcast. This month is going to be all about women in ministry. With it being National Women's History Month, I thought what better time to talk about things that impact me so deeply as a woman who is a pastor. And I just want to be able to share with you some of the things that the Lord has given me the opportunity to do and how I ended up in this position. And then later this month, I'm going to have an incredible friend who's also a woman in ministry join me, and we're going to talk about just some of the ups and downs of being a woman in ministry and just the faithfulness of the Lord throughout it all, whether the people around you feel that that's what the Lord calls women to do or not. So I hope that you'll tune into that as well. And I hope that if you don't agree with women in ministry, you'll listen to these episodes, because maybe it'll just give you the opportunity. You may not be convinced, but it will give you the opportunity to really have an understanding of the biblical standpoint that people are coming from. And it just helps you understand the people around you and the people that are leading in this capacity, how they aren't walking outside of the Lord's plan and how they've come to that conclusion. And if you are a woman in ministry or already believe in that, I hope that this will be encouraging to you, either to share with a woman who's in ministry that just needs to know that there are others who have gone through that, or if you are just wrestling with your own call, I hope that this will be encouraging to you as well. So I'm just going to jump right into it and share how I ended up in ministry and a little bit of the advice that I have for those of you in the categories I just talked about. I didn't grow up thinking that I was going to be in ministry. That's not, I thought I was going to be a writer, marine biologist, doctor. I had lots of things. Pastor was not on that list. And not for lack of thinking that women could be in ministry. I grew up in the Assemblies of God, which is a fellowship that believes in women from the top down being in all levels of leadership and ministry. My church always had at least one woman in pastoral leadership on staff, so it just wasn't a question in my mind. I never thought about being a pastor, but I never thought about whether women could or couldn't any more than any other job. I knew they could, so I didn't think about it. But somehow I came to the conclusion that I wanted to be a pastor's wife. I don't know what gave me that idea. I don't know why that. I think because I didn't. Being in ministry, there's a call on your life that you know that the Lord has placed there, and at those points in time, I did not feel that, have that, experience that, so there was no reason to think about being in ministry. But I wanted to be a part of my church. I wanted to be a part of the church body as a whole, in the deepest capacity I could for the call that I did have in my life, whatever that might be. My favorite worship song in middle school and high school was Dwell in Your House. And there's a line, it's straight out of scripture, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And that line, I didn't just sing that as part of a worship song. That was a deep prayer of my heart and a cry of my heart to the Lord that I would like to dwell in your house, that I want to do things that bring you glory, and I want to be a part of the story of what you're doing in and through your church, the people, not just the building. As I tried to navigate and came to those times where you have to figure out what you're going to do with your life, high school, I came to the conclusion, as I said, my best friend and I had this idea. We were going to marry youth pastors. We were going to be at the same church. We had a whole plan. And because my youth pastor, who was so influential in my life as a leader, and he was one of those people that just singles you out and just pours into you and just sees the capability that you have and puts that to good use. I, like many women in leadership, assertive, some people might say bossy. I'm very thankful that assertive was the word that was often used for me. He saw that as such a crucial leadership quality, and he wanted to help guide me and gave me opportunities to use that leadership. But his wife was a music teacher. And I thought, well, that works really well. She leads worship for our youth ministry. It's just such a complimentary gift set. The timing, she's off on during summer when there's a lot of extra things for youth ministry and kids ministry, whatever ministry we might be doing. I assume it would start there. And it's also just time you're off in the evenings. Just I thought it fits really well. It makes sense to be a teacher, a music teacher married to a youth pastor. I don't know how I was planning to marry this youth pastor, but I just thought the Lord, that's what he was going to do. Then that youth pastor left rather abruptly, and it was a really, really hard time for me and a lot of our youth group. He was beloved, and he and his wife both. We adored them. I still do. And that was just a really hard time to walk through. And because I had been on the worship team for a long time, worship leading occasionally, I became one of the people to lead worship for our youth ministry. To give you a picture, our youth ministry was a little over 100 students, 9th through 12th grade. And we had a really cool youth ministry building. So it felt like the spotlights are really on you leading worship up there. And I was a bit intimidated, but so thankful for the opportunity this particular night to lead worship on during our midweek service, which was our main service as a youth ministry. And everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong that day. Like, it just fell apart. I was humiliated. I wanted to be off that stage so fast. I just wanted worship to be over. I couldn't wait for us to get through those songs. We were struggling in rhythm. We were struggling with staying every part of that you would hope would not happen. The lyrics, like tech issues, everything went wrong that night. And I walked off so thankful that we had a guest speaker who had already indicated that she wanted to end the message with some pre-recorded music that was specific to her message. So we didn't have to be a part of that altar call at all and have to figure out being up there again. And I got to participate in that altar call. You know, as a student leader, someone in leadership, sometimes you don't get to be involved in every altar call because you are leading. So I was so deeply thankful, but also I ran to that altar at the end almost in tears. And I especially then was not one to cry. And I just was crying out to the Lord, asking him, why did you let me get up there and fall on my face? Why did you let me do that? And there were only 3 times in my whole life. So this is not the way the Lord usually speaks to me. It was like audible, but it was in my head that I heard his voice speak. And he said, so you'd be humble enough to hear what I have to say. It was like a gut punch and fear and excitement and stun feeling. And I was like, what do you want to say? And it was just a simple question. What if I want you to be the pastor? I had no response to that. That was the end of him speaking, and I just kind of sat there like, me? A pastor? Why hasn't that ever occurred to me? Is that something I'd want to do? That's not something I'd want to do. I was dual enrolled at the community college and majoring in music already, and I had straight A's. I was loving what I was doing. And just that, you don't derail a plan already. I don't want to derail that plan. And so I thought, well, but obedience is important. That's what God calls us to, is obedience. So I just wrestled with this for a really long time. Well, what felt like a really long time. I had to decide before I graduated, would I be obedient or would I continue down the path I was going? For the time being, I continued down that path because I was already enrolled in those classes. And the next year, as I really started having to make those decisions, went into my senior year, I really had to start making decisions. I kind of stubbornly decided I wasn't going to go into ministry. I didn't really broadcast that, share that. Just internally was kind of like, nah. And suddenly, in my classes, I am not kidding you, I went from straight A's in these same classes to like the next test, I got an F on it. An F. Not even like a D or like, it couldn't be just an F. And it got my attention again. And I spent some time praying, and I know God speaking, but it was very clear to me internally This was the Lord saying, if you don't make the decision, I'm going to slam that door. Not that he was going to force me to be in ministry, but this door I was trying to go through, he was closing it if I didn't choose to close it myself. I thankfully was able to still do well in that class, and I didn't flunk out of it or anything, but it did really bring me back to, the Lord opens and closes the doors he in front of you. Like, yes, there are terrible things that happen, and there are things, but God works all things together for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. And I just needed to trust in what he had for me and not try to figure everything out on my own and do what I wanted. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is like our family verse. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your path. I don't like the message. I don't typically endorse that version because it's a very loose interpretation. But sometimes it really just hits the heart of things, and that's a verse where I feel like it really does. And it just says, trust the Lord and don't try to figure it out. That's what we all try to do, isn't it? And that was just a season where I was trying to make my own path and figure it out on my own. And the Lord was just asking me to trust him. And so in that season, when I did, I had kept the doors kind of open. I applied to schools for both music education and ministry, and I was accepted for both things. So it was like he was not slamming any doors in my face, but he was gently reminding me that's not the door he wanted me to walk through. Was I going to be obedient or try to force my own path? So I took that jump and I majored in pastoral ministry. Not any just straight pastoral ministry. And the Lord just honored that in so many ways. I mean, not the least of which being I met my husband, who was a pastoral ministry major as well. And so it turns out you can be both, the pastor's wife and the pastor. And his call has looked very different than he expected as well, not in lead pastoral ministry, but working in relief ministry and other theological contexts that are so impactful, and I'm so thankful for. And I'm so thankful that we have the ability to support each other and encourage each other in that. So I've been the more forward-facing pastoral ministry in our marriage, which is not typical for a lot of men and women who have those degrees or who in general. But I'm so thankful for that. I'm so thankful that I was obedient, and that my childhood pastor, he always said, blessings follow obedience. And it's so true that when you are obedient to the Lord, he does bless your obedience. Even if there's struggles in the midst of it, he opens the right doors and he works things together for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose, as scripture says. So I have a couple things I just really want you guys to get out of this. And the first is, if you think women shouldn't be in ministry, I would love to give you just a couple of things to look into. The first one, I'm going to tell it to everyone who's listening. Nijay Gupta has a book. He is a New Testament theologian. You should just read everything he has, but for the purpose of this, he has a book called Tell Her Story. It's the first deeply theological, very readable book that I encountered. That it's not dry. Sometimes deep theological books can be a little bit dry, but they're like really good, but they don't capture you with story or pull you in. Nijay Gupta changes the narrative on that, literally. He changes how he shares that narrative. It's deeply biblical, strictly theological, so historically ingrained, and very readable, very enjoyable. He delves into the way that scripture has been culturally shifted. So if you are only reading a Bible in your language's translation, you're getting cultural bias because they choose to translate words based on how that culture will understand them, but also on how that culture handles things too. So they sometimes would skew things that it's not exactly how things were happening then. So just read that book. Do a little bit of research. Don't stay in the lane that agrees with you. It's really easy in any topic for anyone to just stay in a lane of what agrees with you. It's just like social media. You get into an algorithm and you go on social media and it's like, I feel like the whole world is saying whatever. And it's because of the content or the people that you follow, or that you get filtered the same content. Well, the same can be true with any opinion, thoughts, or feelings. It can be really easy to get into an echo chamber and only hear the thoughts of those who agree with us. But if we really believe something to be true, we shouldn't be afraid of hearing the opposing view so that we can understand that. For example, it's something people don't often realize or think about. So, feminism is a really interesting topic to get into. And I, as a kid, was really adamantly not a feminist. And I took a feminism class because I wanted to know what I'm not, because I felt like I often was told that to be a woman in ministry, that I must be very, not liberal politically, but liberal with the Bible, and a just really feminist bend that I'm over here like hating on men and hating on tradition because I want to be a woman in ministry. So I wanted to know what feminism really was, to know, am I? Am I a feminist? Do I disagree? Do I agree with feminism? And if you're wanting that answer, I would be a historical feminist in the case of like suffragettes and things like that. But we have politicized feminism in a lot of ways. And so I sometimes am hesitant to align myself with that word simply because it can come with some connotations that I don't agree with. But I do agree with the fundamental baseline of feminism, but not some of the misappropriation of the term and some of the later context that comes with that. I don't think women belong in the kitchen, but I also don't think that men are beneath women. So there's a fine line that true feminism, I think, falls in, but that's not what's often represented in the media. Sidelined a little bit. Now, for those of you who are called to ministry and you're trying to figure out, what do you say to people who think that you're wrong? I think some of my favorite comments I was told, I had someone tell me, while I was as a major, pastoral ministry major, you make a really great pastor's wife. Go pursue it. Or somebody else say, women aren't supposed to be in ministry. Have you ever read the Bible on that? And things like that. So in my master's program, I had a Greek class, and I decided in that Greek class, I wanted to know exactly what Paul said, because, Paul's who everybody uses against us as women in ministry. And I adore the Pauline epistles. I've always said, Paul, I love Paul. I think he's amazing. And had I lived back then, there would have been, there's a 1st and 2nd Timothy, those books. There would have been a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Tara, because I would have been following him, wanting to be mentored by him, but I would have needed a little more help than Timothy did. So I love Paul. I think that he brings such richness and wisdom to scripture. I'm so thankful that there's so much from him. I think he was really just a great voice to hear from in so many contexts. But I know so many women who don't appreciate Paul, because those are the verses that are thrown in your face, that women are to be silent in the church, and they are taken out of context quite often. So I would encourage you to do what I did. I like, if you're in school for ministry, then take that opportunity, make one of your papers around this, of really researching those scripture verses, researching Paul, and having understanding of what he said. In that time, one of the things that stands out to me most that I learned is the word diakonos. In English texts, that is typically translated when talking about men as deacon or as leader, or it's something of that nature. And for women, it's often translated as servant. But in the original Greek, it's the exact same word. No one was trying to differentiate based on men and women. That was just in like King James, or in King James time, or in our time even now, when you're translating that, it's just more palatable to translate that a woman is a servant of the Lord, because we all are, rather than to say she's a leader, she's the pastor, or she's the deacon in that time. But she was. So I just encourage you to go back and read those scriptures. And you should also read the Nijay Gupta book, Tell Her Story. It is so eye-opening to realizing just the levels of leadership women have been in since the 1st century, since the start of the church, that women have been in every part of leadership. They have never been excluded from teaching and preaching in the historic church. That's more in the modern church. So research those things, understand it for yourself. You don't need to defend yourself to everyone, though. when people confront me about those things, my response isn't to tell them all these things I've learned. I learned those things so that internally I know that I heard the Lord correctly and I am testing what he called me to and what I heard against scripture. But what I say externally to people when they question that is, you know what? I guess it's between me and God, because and if you have an issue with it, you should take that up with God as well, because I have to be obedient to what I feel he's called me to do, just like you have to be obedient to what you feel he's called you to do. And we have to test that. We all have to test that with scripture. There's no need to get into an argument or to cause dissension in the church, because we are called to unity, and we do not need to let anything, especially a call to ministry. That is not what the Lord wants. He doesn't want our call to cause division. He wants it to cause unity, to cause growth and encouragement and edification of the body, just as he does with every gift that he gives to believers. So I hope that you'll do that. Spend some time in researching that. Come up with what your response will be when people have those issues. Maybe it's as simple as just not talking about it with some people. I have people in my life that I love dearly that are close to me who don't know how to justify what I do. I even had a dear sweet pastor say to me once, you know, I don't believe in women in ministry, but I believe you're called to ministry and I don't know what to do with that. That he just didn't know how to justify what he witnessed me doing in ministering in front of him versus what he believed and had been told his whole life. So once again, it's just spend some time in scripture. You can twist scripture to say whatever you want. So it's really important that we go back to the original, that we go back and spend some time delving in and test scripture against itself and make sure it all aligns, because you know, those scriptures about Paul, what always rubbed me the wrong way of why I never thought that they meant much is because I didn't feel that they aligned with the rest of scripture. They felt out of place. And when you understand the context of those verses, when you understand what's going on in that specific context, in that specific city, church, with those people that letter was written to, it makes it so much easier to understand why it seemed out of place. So and Tell Her Story with Nijay Gupta really delves into that deeper. And I encourage you to check that out. Another book that just came out, I have not read it yet. It actually hasn't come out yet. It comes out later this month. I have pre-ordered a copy of it because I really want to read it. It's by Beth, Allison, Barr, and it's called Making of a Pastor's Wife, Beth, Allison, Barr. And she talks about the whole concept of how oftentimes women who are called to ministry choose to go the route of a pastor's wife because they think that's actually the only way that they can be in ministry, whether they were told that or that's just what happened, like how I did. Like, I don't know where I came up with that idea, but somehow I thought that was the way to be involved in ministry. So check out those two books. I'll drop those in the show notes. Spend some time praying over it and thinking about it and reflecting on it. And if you ever have questions about it, shoot them my way. I will never shy away from having a good theological conversation, especially about one that I'm as passionate about as women in ministry. I believe that every person is made uniquely in God's image, and that God has a call for your life, and that he wants to use men and women to reach the entire world for his name. And so we should encourage and support that in every way that we can. Thanks so much for coming and listening to my podcast today. I am so thankful that you're a part of this community, and I hope that you will share this episode with a friend and help them just be encouraged by my story, and hopefully encouraged to share their own story as well. And also make sure to check out in 2 weeks the episode with my friend as we talk about our experiences as women in ministry. Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed the show, hit subscribe so you won't miss an episode. And I would so appreciate if you took a moment to review the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. That way others can find the show too. If you'd like to connect with me outside of the show, you can find me on socials, especially Instagram and Facebook. I'm at Tara C. Zimmer in all the places. Thanks again, and see you next time.